From the headquarters of Telesur English in Havana, Cuba, this is From the South. I'm Laura Palmero. A Cuban medical brigade with more than 200 physicians arrived in Venezuela last Sunday to join efforts in the fight against COVID-19. As part of the Cuba Solidarity campaign with dozens of countries around the world, the so-called White Coats Army arrived in Venezuela to integrate the social health program Mission Barrio Adentro. This is part of an agreement signed between both nations for the arrival of 1,000 Cuban doctors, who will be gradually added from August to September. Cuba and Venezuela have been carrying out the medical mission for 17 years, and there are currently more than 20,000 Cuban professionals who will strengthen the Venezuela's health system.
We will always say that we do not have enough words to thank Cuba, its doctors, its nurses, the love they give to each of the patients they serve in Venezuela. Venezuela has the joy and pride to welcome Cuban doctors, to the collaborators in their boson, and to treat them as brothers. We are brothers who give our life for the life of others, which is the task of health workers.
Venezuela's Foreign Minister Jorge Arreaza said that the arrival of Cuban doctors represents yet another victory for countries that oppose the intentions of the United States.
It is incredible that the United States government intends to sanction those countries that receive Cuban doctors, that is, the countries that makes war, the ruling elite that makes war, that sends weapons, that promotes death and violence, which finance terrorism. Then aims to sanction those governments that, in order to care for their people, call Cuba and ask for solidarity and scientific knowledge. That showed us that we are on the right side of history.
Venezuelan President Nicolás Maduro has commended Russia for their development of a vaccine that could put an end to COVID-19 pandemic. He also highlighted how his government is already planning to acquire this vaccine for all citizens.
I celebrate the Russian vaccine, and I celebrate that Russia will be the first country in the world to vaccinate citizens against COVID-19. The time will come for all of Venezuela to get vaccinated, and I will be the first to do so, to set an example. We will then move on to vaccinate medical personnel, senior citizens, people suffering from certain illnesses. This is all being planned right now, but we do it in secret, because the United States government persecutes us. Donald Trump and Elliot Abrams attacks us even on that front. They continuously stand in the way of us getting medicine for our people, but we have managed to overcome their obstacles. We manufacture what we can here, and we purchase what we cannot. We continue to guarantee free medicine for our people, just like the COVID-19 testing kits.
Malls and cinemas in the Mexican capital have reopened their doors for entire families. While malls were reopened in early July, children were prohibited from entering. On Tuesday, theaters were open to everyone, including children. Theaters have implemented various hygiene measures, including providing hand sanitizers and having seating arrangements that allowed for the implementation of social distancing. Next week, entire families will also be able to visit public museums.
I believe the hardest thing was keeping them a little bit calm, because at the end of the day, we're missing some space and coexistence with other people. It has been complicated, partly for her mother, who is the one staying at home.
It was decided that only Cuauhtémoc Avenue will work as entrance and exit, in order to have bigger control over users' access. We have implemented sanitizing mats, antibacterial gel, temperature checkpoints, and yesterday we received a chamber in which you can come in to sanitize your body.
Luis Abinader has been sworn in as President of the Dominican Republic. Abinader from the Modern Revolutionary Party won a landslide victory back in July, ending 16 years of unbroken rule by the Caribbean nation-centered PLD party. Among those present at the inauguration ceremony included Asian President Jovenel Moïse, U.S. Secretary of State Mike Pompeo, and the foreign ministers of Turkey, Spain, Guatemala, Honduras, and the European Union.
Our government will implement a national plan to detect, isolate, track and treat those infected on an unprecedented scale in our history, with a commitment to ensuring access to the vaccine against the virus for the entire Dominican population as soon as it becomes available.
9 teenagers were murdered late on Saturday in the city of Samaniego, located in Colombia's Nariño department. According to witness report, the hooded men opened fire on the teenagers who were gathered on a sidewalk. A number of bystanders were also injured. The governor of Nariño, John Rojas, condemned the violence on Twitter and called on President Iván Duque, on the state police and the Attorney General's office to take action to return peace to the region. Rojas added that only through funding opportunities and compliance with the peace agreements can be consolidated peace. This is the second massacre to take aim at teenagers this last week in Colombia, as on August 12, 5 kids between 14 and 18 years of age were similarly murdered in Cali. Peru has recorded more than 10,000 cases of COVID-19, which leaves the country with the second highest number of contagions in Latin America. The pandemic also places Peru in second place with the highest mortality rate, with 78 deaths per each 100,000. This Sunday, 10,000 new cases were registered. The Peruvian government is reimposing curfews and banning family gatherings in response to a new surge in coronavirus infections.
The police are in charge of enforcing the law, but more than that, we need the population to understand. We've had several months of this, that we must take care of ourselves to prevent contagion, agglomerations, to follow all the indications that come from the health sector.
The persistent COVID-19 increase in the country has brought discontent of Peruvians. According to a survey of the Institute of Peruvian Studies, 31% of the respondents consider that President Martín Vizcarra has mismanaged the threat of the novel coronavirus. Meanwhile, other 46% qualify the president handling as normal and 23% as good or very good. And we'll be right back after this short break, so don't go away. Welcome back to From the South. Al-Shabaab militants stormed a beachside hotel in the Somali capital Mogadishu after setting off a car bomb outside the building. According to local reports, at least 15 people were killed by the explosion, with some 30 left injured. The militants then took hostages and barricaded themselves on the top floors of the hotel. But the situation came to an end later on Sunday after security forces managed to kill all the militants. Al-Shabaab has claimed responsibility for the attack, referring to it as a martyrdom-seeking operation. An army of volunteers is working round the clock to help contain the oil spill that has devastated Mauritius' coastline after a Japanese tanker ran aground last month. Volunteers have been helping to build improvised floating buffers to hold back the oil, filling them with straw, leaves, and even human hair. On Saturday, the ship broke into two parts, with one of the parts sinking into the ocean. The spill is both an environmental and economic disaster for Mauritius, which relies heavily on tourism.
These are still shocking images. We know the natural heritage of Mauritius. To see this ship stranded here in conditions that are quite inexplicable and implausible, it inevitably arouses an emotion. I could sense the strong emotions. We have seen how Mauritians have worked for days on end to protect their shores.
And the French Minister for the Overseas arrived in Mauritius this weekend to offer France support in the management of the disaster.
On our side, we are always trying to take buoys like this to try to divert the oil that fell on the coast to reward it all. Because as the tide increases, soon it will be the big tide. Well, the oil will come out. So We try to surround it before it goes back and falls in the mangroves.
We Mauritians are not a submissive people. We are not a people waiting for direction. No, we can take the lead. We can take the initiative because
On our side, we are
Libya
always
has rejected a compensation package offered by Germany for the mass murder of tens of thousands of indigenous people during the colonial era. President H. Jane Gobb said that the 10 million euros offered by Berlin as reparation for the genocide committed against native people in the early 20th century was unacceptable and needed to be revised. German occupiers in Namibia killed tens of thousands of indigenous Herero and Nama people between 1904 and 1908, which historians have called the first genocide of the 20th century. The German government has so far refused to formally apologize for the killings. A group of Nigerian women who had been stranded in Lebanon in the wake of COVID-19 pandemic have been evacuated home. The group of 43 women recently raised an alarm on their situation from a safe house in Beirut following August 4's deadly explosion. They had reportedly been kicked out of their employer's home once the pandemic took hold. Cleanup efforts continue in Beirut, Lebanon, as President Michel Aoun has said that there is no delay in investigations into the explosions that occurred at the city's port and its surrounding areas. This week, the Prosecutor General pressed charges against 25 people, including senior port and customs officials and security officers. On Friday, the Iranian Foreign Minister Mohammad Javad Zarif visited Beirut and announced this nation is ready to help Lebanon with all reconstruction efforts and with the rehabilitation of the electricity sector. Protests in occupied Palestinian land against the Emirate-Israel deal continue to gain strength. Citizens are voicing their anger at the United Arab Emirates for allegedly betraying the Palestinian cause and have called for their expulsion from the Arab League and the Organization of the Islamic Conference.
We demand from the UAE to back down from this deal. Otherwise, it is required from the Arab League and the Organization of the Islamic Conference to expel the UAE from these two organizations. We demand from the UAE.
Hundreds also gathered in Karachi, Pakistan on Sunday to show support for the Palestinian cause, as the Jamaat al-Islami party has already made a call for the nation to sever ties with the UAE. Pakistan does not officially recognize Israel, and on Friday, the foreign minister offered a cautious response to the announcement, saying that their approach will be guided by our evaluation of how Palestinians' rights and aspirations are upheld.
Today we observe the Day of Palestine in Pakistan. The world must condemn the Israeli atrocities. Every wise man in the world should support the cause of Palestine. We should urge the United Nations to condemn Israel and support the Palestinian cause. America is considered a devil as they support Israeli atrocities against Palestine. We must expose America. Palestine should get the right to self-determination. Israel is forcibly building houses on Palestinian land. We cannot tolerate this at any cost.
And we have more news coming up after this final short break, so stay with us. Welcome back to From the South. The Prime Minister of New Zealand, Jacinda Ardern, announced this Monday the postponement of the general elections that were scheduled for September 19. The decision follows a resurgence of COVID-19 cases in the country.
And taken wide soundings, I have decided on balance to move the election by 4 weeks to the 17th of October. At the end of last week, I was advised that this date is achievable and presents no greater risk than had we retained the status quo. Having weighed up,
members of the Democratic Party have accused U.S. President Donald Trump of deliberately sabotaging the country's postal service in order to help his re-election bid. Residents of the Northern California in the U.S. have been ordered to evacuate their homes as wildfires rage out of control. Officials said the fires had already burned at least 80 square kilometers. Firefighters had been battling to put out the flames before they reached nearby homes. Local authorities said the fires have grown worse due to a prolonged heat wave that swept through the states in past weeks. In the United Kingdom, hundreds of students have taken to the streets of London to protest against the markdown of their predicted A-level grades. Protesters gathered outside the Department for Education after nearly 40% of A-level marks were downgraded from teachers' suggestions by a government algorithm, causing many to lose their university spots. After exams were cancelled due to the pandemic, grades were awarded using a controversial algorithm that reportedly copies already existing inequalities in the education system, pushing the grades for students in private schools higher than those in public schools. And now let's take a look at some more stories from around the world.
Anti-government protesters rallied in Bangkok on Sunday following the arrest of 3 protest leaders. Mobilization have been demanding a complete overhaul of the government and a rewrite of the 2017 constitution, which citizens believe skewed last year's poll in favor of the ruling party. Thailand has seen nearly daily demonstrations for the past months by students-led groups denouncing the prime minister, a former military chief who led the 2014 coup. The migrant rescue ship Sea-Watch 4 has left Spain to resume operations in the Mediterranean Sea following strict COVID-19 health protocols. The German NGO behind the ship has joined forces with Doctors Without Borders to restart migrant rescue missions in the Mediterranean Sea, as no humanitarian ship has been operating here since the landing of the Ocean Viking in Sicily at the beginning of July.
We've implemented a bunch of measures to ensure that we can respond safely and appropriately in the context of COVID. For example, prior to boarding the ship, all crew members undergo 7 days of quarantine and have to have a negative PCR test before boarding. As well, we'll have daily temperature monitoring of all crew. And once we embark rescued people, we will do immediate triage, including temperature taking of all of our rescued people.
A number of NGO rescue boats have been detained on flimsy technicalities, so there are currently no other search and rescue boats in the central Mediterranean. So this, combined with the fact that when it comes to an increased number of departures from Libya over the summer months and a complicating factor of COVID, means that we're preparing for many eventualities.
An almost complete skeleton of a mammoth has been found in Russia's Yamal Peninsula. A local fisherman alerted paleontologists about the remains, which were buried in the Siberian permafrost. While it's not rare to find a mammoth remains in the region, researchers say what makes this one special is its state of preservation, as soft tissue still remains intact. Once preserved and studied, the mammoth will be displayed in a museum in the artistic seat of Selekad.
And we have come to the end of this news brief. We leave you now with images of some Turkish beaches that have seen an increase in the number of nest and baby wild of endangered species like sea turtles, and which is considered one positive effect of the reduction of human activities and tourism given the coronavirus pandemic. For Telesur English, I'm Laura Palmero. Thank you for watching.